Di parang iscrittore para tinutulungan tulungan pagdidinig.
All right, so I said I would introduce myself a little bit more. So again, I'm Nate up in Sarita. I've been the youth pastor there. I moved there in about August of 2021. So I've been there about 4 years. I will preface, just like to say this, I am not 20. I am 31, believe it or not. Now, next week, someone will be here who is actually in his 20s, but I am not. I'm 31, been married for 9 years, have 2 boys, and so we moved from, I grew up in Seattle, Washington, moved to Iowa for my first youth pastor job, was there for about 2.5 years before we came down to Sarita, and we were so excited, I'll tell you what. And we had in our minds, right, my wife and me, and we were like, man, we know exactly how this is going to look. We knew that what our plan was going to be, how things were going to work itself out. We were going to do this, and we were going to do that, and we'd like formed all these great plans, right? We had it all figured out, exactly how God was going to use us in Sarita. But I don't know if you ever heard this before, but there's a saying that goes, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. All right, and yeah, God laughed, all right, because we moved there in August of 2021, and life was good, the sun was shining, as it always is, one of my favorite parts of living here. But then on May 2nd of 2022, so about 9 months after I moved there, I was on the way to church for a staff meeting on a Monday morning, and somebody was driving, not paying attention, didn't yield, pulled out, and hit me on my motorcycle. I was going about 50 miles per hour at the time and absolutely just crushed the left side of my body. So I remember getting hit. I immediately hit the ground. And I remember thinking, like, 2 things kind of came to my mind. The first one was, I think I might die. I couldn't breathe. I thought, like, I'm laying there and I'm thinking this is going to be it. But then the second thing I thought was, man, my left leg does not feel like it's in the right spot. And so I ended up breaking my femur. My ribs were broken. I shattered. My shoulder was on the left side. And then my left ankle got the absolute worst of it, just completely decimated my left ankle. Thankfully, they took me to Banner Medical Center where they were checking me out. And somehow, by some miracle, while those things were serious and those things hurt real bad, I can tell you, the thing that was the miracle, somehow, in the midst of all that mangle on my left leg, they recognized that my aorta had been punctured. Now, they rushed me, I don't remember this at all, but they rushed me straight to surgery where they put a stent in my aorta. An absolute miracle that they even found it, because if they didn't find it, I would have been dead in the ICU before I'd even fallen asleep that night. And so it was a miracle that God saved me, and here I am. I'm standing here, so thankful for all that. Yeah. And boy, so many crazy things out of that. And then things kind of started to settle, right? I started to feel like I was walking somewhat normal. Sometimes people are still like, are you limping? And I don't notice it anymore. But for the most part, things are good and things were settling down. And okay, life was getting back to normal. And then in October of the next year, 2023, so about whatever that math is, like 15, 16 months after that, my youngest son was having some breathing problems. And so we weren't really sure kind of what was going on, and so we took him in to get it checked, and they found kind of a lump in his chest, which sometimes kids have lumps and they just go away. We got the scan, and we found out that he had cancer on October 10th of 2023, right as things were settling in, lymphoma. And so that has been the battle. And I will say, I just want to at least make sure I clarify that my son is here this morning. He's in the kids building, having a great time, I'm sure, with his older brother. And he'll be done in February. He'll be all done with all of his treatments. And so he is alive, thank goodness. But I could tell you that was one of the hardest times of my life. I thought the accident was going to be one of the hardest times of my life, and then I experienced watching my son go through cancer treatments, and the feeling of that was just something I'd never ever experienced in my life, and hope that I would never experience. And while I've seen things work out in these unique ways, I'll be honest and tell you that there have been times where I've wondered, God, why? For what purpose is this happening in our life? Because I know intellectually that God is doing some amazing work, and he's always got a plan, and I've grown up in church and I do all these things, but I still wonder, is God really working this out for good? And I don't know where you're at in your life. And I will tell you that, like, sometimes we can start to compare our suffering with other people's suffering, and we can think, like, well, okay, mine's not that big of a deal. But that's not how that works. In fact, like, every trial is a trial, and we don't minimize trials because trials are trials. And so you might have found yourself in a trial at a time in your life, and you're like, this is tough. Boy, I've gone to church and I remember, like, God works everything out for the good of those who love him. And, like, I know all these things, and, like, I know that God has a plan, and I've seen how this has all worked out. However, in this situation, when it hits my own life, we start to ask the question, like, is God really working this out for my good? What could God possibly be doing in this situation? What is taking God so long? And I could tell you in the last, 2 years or so, coming up on 2 years, even 3 years, I have wondered often, like, what could be coming out of this situation? And I'll tell you that I'm not the first person to ever feel this. In fact, historically, if you look back, I've been really excited that we've been in the book of Exodus because the book of Exodus has some incredible things. And if you want to talk about a people who have experienced a time of suffering and probably asked themselves this very question, it would be the Israelites. We kicked off the book of Exodus last week. I know you guys did, and so if you were here or you just know the story, just to kind of give a quick update, right? So in the end of the book of Genesis, you have Joseph, and Joseph goes into Egypt, and he's sold into slavery by his own brothers. And then what happens is he goes into Egypt and becomes prominent. He's faithful to God, and God gives him this place. And so Moses gets providence from God. God gives Moses these plans, and so Moses executes. And in his wisdom, I got the names mixed up. Joseph executes this plan, and he saves essentially Egypt, but he also saves his own people, Israel, Jacob. His brothers come, they discover it, and it's all this amazing thing. And then we get into the beginning of the book of Exodus, and all of a sudden you start to find out that while Israel is living in Egypt and things are going well and they're growing, there's a new Pharaoh that arises over Egypt who did not know Joseph, in verse 8. Now, when we say that he didn't know Joseph, the idea is not that he didn't know about who Joseph was. Everybody would have known in Egypt who Joseph was. Joseph was incredibly important. He essentially saved Egypt. They would have known who Joseph was. What this means is that he didn't recognize Joseph. He didn't care about what Joseph did. All he cared about was retaining power. He started to worry. Oh, they're growing too fast. They're going to take us over. And so he starts putting in these stipulations where he overworks them. And then he starts to say, that's not enough. So then he makes them work as slaves as their primary job, and he starts to abuse them. Then he starts to say, they're still growing too fast because God is still blessing Israel because he said, I'm going to make you fruitful and you're going to multiply. And God keeps blessing this. And so finally, the Pharaoh is like, that's it. We got to kill all the baby boys that are born right now. Genocide is the next thing that this Pharaoh decides to go for. And it's with this backdrop, right? It ends in chapter 1 with this idea that, like, the Pharaoh has now ordered everybody in Egypt to kill all the newborn baby boys, to throw them in the Nile River. And this feels like, at this point, right, if you're reading the story and if you're existing and you're living here in Egypt at that time, that where's the hope? We're God's chosen people. What is going on here? What is God doing here? I thought God was supposed to take care of us. But there's this little glimmer here, even if they don't know it yet, there's a little glimmer of hope that's about to take place. But I do want to at least preface that, like, before we get into any farther, that I think what we're going to realize today is that life for us is a lot of times like a puzzle. Let me explain, okay? Have you guys all like worked on a puzzle before, right? And so when you start it, you get, thankfully, the box nowadays. Well, I remember my grandma, she was a big space saver, and so she would toss the box and just put them in bags, which did save space. But then as kids, when we would get the bag and you'd like dump the puzzle out, there was no like reference point. So it would take, we would never finish the puzzle, right? I would show up at my grandma's house weeks later and she'd still be like putting the rest together. It would take us absolutely forever, but it was like really challenging, and so we'd start to do it. But one thing about puzzles is that in the beginning, especially when we'd like lay all the pieces out, it was like, have no clue what this is supposed to make. Absolutely no idea. Like, you could see that there was like, okay, there's like a little bit of a shade of blue and red there, and then like that's all one color, and like it just didn't all fit together. But what was great was that when you'd show back up at her house and she was pretty much done with it and she'd leave it out for us so you could see it, you'd be like, oh, that's amazing. How did I not see that these pieces were going to fit together here in this order? It all made complete sense. And a lot of times in our life, what we do is that our life is in many ways this puzzle where like we get these little pieces and we can't see what's going on. We're like, this just looks completely random. There's nothing happening here. But what God does is he takes the puzzle pieces and he's putting them all together. God can see the whole picture. He sees exactly what it's supposed to look like. And he knows that this little piece here that seems insignificant, that seems like it doesn't matter, what it's going to do is it's going to connect and make sense. Because God takes difficult and seemingly unconnected phenomena and he brings them together to create something beautiful. This is what God does, and this is what God's going to do here in the book of Exodus. He's going to take things that just don't seem like they make any sense, like what a random detail this is. Why is this in there? What's happening here? And he creates something incredibly beautiful out of that picture. And so Exodus 2 starts with some really great news, even if they don't notice it. Exodus 2, 1 through 2 says, "Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and gave birth to a son, and when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months." Now, really quickly, I want to acknowledge that, like, this is not talking about Moses' like physical looks as far as like, it's not saying and Moses was not an ugly baby. I don't know if you've seen babies, but like a lot of times they're not that beautiful. I loved my own children, but they were a little weird looking, just to be honest with you. So this is not what it's saying. Now, he might have looked good. I don't know what Moses looked like. What this is saying is that there was something unique off the get-go about Moses. In fact, if we go to Acts 7, Stephen is talking about history, and there's the New Testament. He's recalling Israelite history, and he records this about Moses. He says, "At this time, Moses was born, and he was beautiful to God," it says. "And he was nurtured for 3 months in his father's home." And so what we want to see is that, like Moses, there was something about his birth that was already just unique. This is not like an indictment on like, well, if he wasn't beautiful, the mother would have just gotten rid of him. That's not what this is saying, but they want you to know, right? Moses, who writes this, wants you to know that from the get-go, there was something unique about this baby to both God and the parents. There was a plan that was, and we don't know exactly what that is, but there was something already happening here. And there we start to kind of see like this first puzzle piece, right? So there's a little puzzle piece, and right now we probably have no clue what that is. It just seems super random. But there's a puzzle piece that gets started here that God's like, I've got a plan, and he puts this little puzzle piece. There's a child that's born, and he's unique. And we get this first puzzle piece as we're reading. Then in verse 3, the story continues. "But when she could no longer hide him, she got him a papyrus basket and covered it with tar and pitch. Then she put the child in it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile." So mom here in a desperate move, right? She's like, I got to save this child. And this was normal for the Israelites, by the way, right? Like they were disobeying Pharaoh's order. They were still multiplying. But she's like, I can't hide this baby anymore. Like, it's really hard to hide a 3-month-old baby. They cry a lot, they make a lot of noise. So she recognizes, what do I do? And so she puts him in this basket and she covers it with tar and pitch, which pitch, by the way, was used on the ark back in Genesis. Just a fun fact for you. And so she puts it in the reeds. And what that means is that it's out of the current of the river, and hopes that like the baby Moses is just going to kind of stay amongst the reeds. And right now it seems like a weird plan. Like, I have no idea what her thought was. Like, but then we read in verse 4, there's a little more that's happening to her plan, because it says, "And his sister, whose name was Miriam," we know this because of later on in Scripture, but she's not named here. His sister Miriam stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. So ultimately, right, well, I don't think that Moses' mom knew exactly what was going to happen yet. She just thought there's something about this baby. There's something unique that God has. And so she says, "Miriam, go out. I'm going to put the baby here. I don't know what's going to happen, but just watch and see. Just watch and wait." And it's like a Hail Mary, right, by mom. Mom's like, I don't know. There's a very slight, small chance that this baby can be saved, but I'm going to hope and I'm going to dream because there's something special about it. So Miriam, just watch and see. And ultimately, there are probably about 99% of people who live in Egypt who are Egyptians at this point, where if they found that baby, that baby's dead. Because Pharaoh is an absolute psychopath. Okay, Pharaoh is somebody who's like so hungry for power that he decides he's going to commit genocide on baby boys. That's how firm he is about keeping and retaining the power that he has, is he's killing babies. This guy is an absolute lunatic, and nobody in Egypt is going to defy that man. Except maybe one. And if you're a dad in here, you'll have a guess as to who the only person is who would dare defy Pharaoh. And that is in verse 5, now the daughter of Pharaoh. Only the daughter of Pharaoh would be willing to defy dad's orders. That's it. She's the only one who could probably get away with it. So the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile with her female attendants walking alongside the Nile. And she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave woman, and she brought it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child. And behold, the boy was crying. And she had pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Now, really quickly, before I move and continue really quick, just a couple quick notes here. One, it's really interesting that she notes that it's a Hebrews child right away. So just in case somebody was like, well, maybe the Egyptians would have just like took the child for themselves and tried to pass the child off as Egyptian. Apparently, there was a very big distinction between Hebrew babies and Egyptian babies. And so that plan wasn't going to work. Somebody would have needed to basically bring in a Hebrew child and say, I'm going to keep him anyways. This was absolutely necessary. But then it says that she had pity on the baby. And what this is trying to say is that it's not just like she was like, oh, she felt bad. Like that was a part of it. But what that is they're already acknowledging that pity has forced her to say, I'm gonna keep this baby because there's no way I'm throwing this baby in the Nile. And so Miriam, who's watching from a distance, sees this right away. And it says, then Moses' sister Miriam said to Pharaoh's daughter, hey, shall I go and call a woman for you who's nursing from the Hebrew woman so that she may nurse the child for you? Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go ahead. So the girl went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him, and the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses, and said, because I drew him out of the water. Phew. Incredible scenes here, all right? Like, so mom puts the baby in the reeds in the Nile River, Hail Mary time, right? Which ironically is exactly what Pharaoh asked them to do, technically. So she does that, right? And the only person who can find the baby and save him most likely is the daughter of Pharaoh. And she finds him, and she feels pity on him. And so she takes Moses, and then not only that, then Miriam goes, and she's like, hey, what if I had somebody to feed the baby for you? Because the princess can't feed the baby. She hasn't had a child. That's not how that works. And so she's like, oh yeah, sure, that makes sense. So who comes and gets to feed Moses? His own mom. And she gets paid for it. She gets paid to feed her own child now. And so she does this, and then Moses gets taken into Egyptian household after this is all done, right? He grows up a little bit. And so what Moses is going to do is he's going to learn in the Egyptian household, the same Egyptian household that later he's going to free the people from. He grows in knowledge in this household. This is all unbelievable here. And so again, we get many more pieces to this puzzle, right? It starts to it's still kind of confusing, but we can still at least see okay, there's a little more coming here. There's a little more pieces being added to the puzzle of this situation. And then there's one more thing that kind of can hide under the radar. Because it says that she names him Moses, because I drew him out of the water. Now, what we don't know for sure is it would be actually a little bit unusual for an Egyptian woman to name her son something that meant something in Hebrew but not something in Egyptian. That would be a little bit confusing for her to do that. In Egyptian, Moses most likely means something like son or the son of, all right? So you've got this idea that okay, so Moses is the son, he's the son, and then I'm sure that there was some sort of idea, right? Whether mom influenced or not, we don't know. But his name in Hebrew means to draw out, is where that verb of Moses comes from. It means to draw out. And so while right now the mother draws Moses out of the water, what we're going to see is later on Moses is going to draw his people out of Egypt. So the Egyptian mom names Moses a prophetic name with whether she probably didn't have any clue at all what she was doing. She names him a prophetic name that Moses is going to end up rescuing people out of Egypt. She had no clue. She, as an Egyptian, prophesies about Moses. In fact, if we go into the book of Isaiah, Isaiah writes in 63:11, "Then his people remembered the days of old of Moses, and they ask, where is he who brought them out of the sea with the shepherds of his flock?" In other words, where is the one who drew the people out of slavery? Moses has always been destined. God determined beforehand, even with his name, exactly what Moses was going to do. He was going to save his people from slavery. He was going to save his people from oppression in Egypt. This is what Moses' purpose from the very beginning. So we get one more puzzle piece, slowly being put together. Individually, these things don't seem like they're that big of a deal, right? Like if you were kind of sitting in this moment, you'd be like we read this in the matter of a minute, 30 seconds, whatever, and so it all connects to us. But if you're there, it's not all making sense right away. And this is how things happen, is that in real life, right, we don't get to read things in hindsight in the matter of 30 seconds. Things happen in real time, and time takes a long time. But we can see already that God is doing something unique in this story. We've seen it over and over again in chapter 1. Pharaoh, in his attempt to eliminate the Jewish people, God's like, no thanks, and he grows them more. Nothing is going to thwart God's plan. God has a plan, and no evil is going to thwart this plan. Pieces have already been being put together well before even we get to chapter 2. But here we get to see it start to come together a little bit more. Now, it continues in the narrative. We get to verse 11a. Now, it came about in those days, which whenever you read this, it doesn't mean like literal days. It just means like during that time frame when Moses had grown up. Now, we know because like we can look historically, and it's written other places, that this was about 40 years. So from Exodus chapter 2, verse 10 to verse 11, 40 years passes basically. Now again, for us, that's like half a second. For the people in oppression in Israel, 40 years is a long time. 40 years is a long time to not feel like you're getting an answer from God. 40 years of suffering, of beatings, of oppression, of everything that the Pharaoh tries to do. 40 years, that's a long time. So it came about for 40 years. Now, realistically, there have been things that have happened in this 40 years that we don't have recorded for us that do play a part in what God's going to do. There have been puzzle pieces that have been getting put together, and we don't get to read about them. But God's been doing unique and incredible things throughout his time, even Moses' 40 years where he's been learning in Egypt. But then if we continue, right? So it came about, Moses had grown up 40 years, that he went out to his fellow Hebrews and looked at their hard labors and saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his fellow Hebrews. Now the idea here is not that he was just like pushing him or like giving him a slap, or whatever. He was like beating him down. Like this is like a hard beating. This is something very serious. He sees like there's a potential that this guy could die is the idea here when it's written. It's something very severe. And so he sees this happening to one of his fellow Hebrews. So he looked this way and that. And when he saw there was no one around, he struck and killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. Now he went out the next day, and behold, 2 Hebrews were fighting with each other. And he said to the offender, "Why are you striking your companion?" But he said, "Who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and said, "Surely the matter has become known." So Moses, even though he's raised in an Egyptian household, what we read, again, is in the book of Hebrews, is that by faith, Moses, when he'd grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the temporary pleasures of sin. So Moses had this chance to he could have just stayed in the Egyptian household. Things would have been fine. Life would have been good. But he's a Hebrew. And he sees his own people suffering. And he feels like he has to take action. Something is happening, and Moses cannot go without missing it. And so, absolutely, Moses is going to know all the things that have happened, and so he goes and he does this, and he probably thinks to himself, I'm going to be a hero. They're going to look to me. I can be the one who can help these people out of Egypt. I've grown up in this household. I know all the ins and outs. I can save Egypt, or Israel, but that's not what happens. They don't see it. The guys, they criticize him. Moses is like, why are you beating up your own companion? Why are you doing this to your own friend? And you remember, they're like, who made you a ruler and a judge over us? What are you going to do? Are you going to beat me like you beat that Egyptian? Are you going to kill me like you did to the Egyptian? They miss it. They completely miss it. Again, when we go to the book of Acts, we see Stephen recounting this story. And what Stephen writes about this is he said, Moses, thought that his brothers understood that God was granting them deliverance through him, but they did not understand. This is not the first time Israel is going to miss their deliverer. This is going to happen many other times, that there is a chance where they could see, there's a chance that could happen. This could start anything, right? This kind of moment could start momentum. This could start a revival. They could have jumped on Moses' side, but they miss it. In their pride, who are you? Why do we care who you are? You're not judge over us. And they miss their deliverer. Moses is hoping they're going to see it, but they don't. And now it's been spreading all over, right? It was like in high school when somebody was going to fight, and they're like, we're going to fight after school. And like initially, like 2 people knew, but then by the end of the day, everybody in the school knew. Nobody can keep secrets like that. And so everyone knows, right? And Moses knows that everybody knows. And sometimes we can kind of make this out to be like, Moses acted impulsively, and then he was nervous about it, and so he buried the body. I don't think Moses was acting impulsively. I think Moses knew exactly what he was doing. Now, of course, he buried the body because he also knew exactly what he was doing. But Moses makes a choice. It doesn't work out for him here, but he makes a choice. And then we read that in the very next verse, when Pharaoh heard about this matter, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now, typically we would read right over this, all right, because this is just a minute detail, right? Like, get us to the good stuff. But this is actually really important. So just so you know, this is where Midian is, all right? I've got it right here. This is a general, so you can see Midian's down here, okay? But I'll explain here in a second. So this is like general Midian. Now, Midian, interestingly enough, I learned something new this week. Went to Bible college, read it all the time, somehow missed this. Did you know that Abraham had a second wife after Sarah died? Crazy. Anyways, so he did. I had no clue as I was reading. So it says in Genesis 25, 1 through 2, it's only 2 verses. Now Abraham took another wife after the death of Sarah, whose name was Keturah. She bore to him Zimran, Jokshan, great names, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Now, these generations have all passed, right? But from Midian, the son of Midian, comes the Midianites. So they've got Abrahamic lineage, not through the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, so not the chosen people, not that lineage, but they've got lineage from Abraham, and so they've settled in Midian. So if we go back to the map here, this is where Moses flees to. So he goes from Egypt, and he goes boop, down into Midian, right? Somewhere in Midian. Now, what we're going to find out and why that whole place is circled is because the wilderness of Midian, what happens is Moses is he's going to settle there, and he's going to be there for a while. And the wilderness of Midian is like all over here, right? So like you would travel all the way across through there. You wouldn't just stick in there. Because Moses, he actually has an experience later in Exodus 3 where he is at Mount Sinai, which is most likely somewhere down over there. So he would have been in the wilderness. This is where Moses is doing his stuff. Now, it feels random. Like, okay, Midian, who cares? Like, it was just kind of a refuge place for Moses. He just happened to be there. Like, he had to be there. He couldn't go to Egypt. It means nothing. But actually, there is more to this, because what's going to happen is he's going to lead people, spoiler alert, he's going to lead people out of Egypt. And they're going to settle this is about where Sinai is. We don't officially know exactly which one is Sinai. That's why I say about. But it's probably this one. And then as they are with Moses, because if you guys remember, if you read further along in your Bible, that the Israelites, they're walking through the desert, and God's like, I got a promised land for you. And they're like, sounds great. Thanks for like doing all these amazing things for me, God. And then they walk into the land, and they're like, no, the people are scary. And so they don't want to go in. So then God says they're going to wander for 40 years. And the places they're going to wander are basically right in that blue. That's around the area that they're going to wander in the desert for 40 years. Do you know what's really fascinating? You know who's been spending 40 years there being a farmer? Moses. He's been farming in Midian for 40 years by the time he leaves and takes them out of Exodus. He would have been so familiar with the land. He would have known where the danger is, where the good stuff is, where the springs are, where the mountains are. He would have known all of that because he's been wandering it as a farmer for 40 years. So when we get into the future, right, I won't be here, but when you guys get into the future, you start talking about the chapters where it's like, and they're wandering in the wilderness. You can think of this, that God has been placing and preparing this all beforehand. So again, just another piece of the puzzle, all right? Like, we're starting to add some more things. God's like working in these unique ways because what's going to happen, we're going to kind of summarize here through the next few verses, but what happens is Moses gets married, he has a son, and then he farms there 40 years. He builds a life, which if you're doing your math, right, that's now 80 years before what we read in the beginning. So you've got 1526 BC, where the birth of Moses happens. That's in the beginning of chapter 2. And then by the time we get all the way to Exodus 3, which actually is a little bit more like Exodus 2, the later in the Exodus, but, you know, I'm giving you an idea. 1446 BC is 80 years. It's a long time. That's a long time for the people who are enslaved in Egypt, who are probably wondering, what's going on? What's happening? Life's been hard. You know the amount of deaths that have probably happened, the amount of persecution, the amount of pain, the amount of babies that have died because of genocide, the amount of things that have happened in 80 years. There's a lot. It's been a lot. But chapter 2 concludes with verse 23 through 25. Now it came about in the course of those many days that the king of Egypt dies. Again, many days, just remember, it's not like literal days, it's just during this time. And the sons of Israel groaned because of the bondage. And they cried out, and their cry for help because of their bondage ascended to God. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God saw the sons of Israel and took notice of them. Now, verses 24 through 25 are like the hinge verses of this chapter. If we go back just for a second, so sorry. This is like the hinge here. So in the beginning, what's happened is that there's been a narrative of oppression, slavery. It's been tough. But then verses 24 and 25, there's like, it's going to shift all of a sudden to like it's been going down. Things have not been good. And there's been little glimpses, but overall, and then it's going to shift. And now you're going to see deliverance coming out of the rest of the book of Exodus. At least for the many chapters coming up, is that God's going to deliver Israel, but it hinges right here on 24 and 25. This is where the narrative is going to change. However, there's this implication when we read this, right? If you're reading, it says, God heard and remembered. Like we have this, like, what do you mean God remembered? Like, did he forget? And God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them. Like, when we read it, we can kind of get the sense of like, oh, God totally forgot about Israel until they cried out for help. Well, that's not actually what's happening. A couple things is to note, and we could get really deep into it, but ultimately, here's what we want to recognize. Is that this is not what's going on. God did not forget Israel. God did not forget his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that they would be fruitful and multiply, that they were his chosen people. God didn't forget any of that. God does not forget his covenant. He is the perfect covenant maker. He always remembers. And then in the end, when we see God took notice of them, really, when we look in the Hebrew, the verb, it should be God knew. It's just a simple statement. God knew. And we're going to see that like throughout this, that God didn't remember. He knew. God's been seeing everything that's been happening in the midst of Israel and everything that's going on and their oppression and their slavery and their pain and their suffering and their sorrow. And it says that God didn't remember it when they complained. God knew about it. He knew that it was happening, and he'd been making a plan the whole time. He's been putting things together one after another because God knew. He knew what was going on. He had something beautiful that he was working on. Something that Israel is going to celebrate for the rest of their lives. God knew. And sometimes when we hit these times where we can think what is going on? Israel would have to be wondering, what's happening? Where is God? Does he even care what's happening? God knew. Past, present, future, God knew. He knew. It's not a matter of if God is working, it's how God's working and what the picture of beauty is going to look like. And we start to get, again, now we get a lot more pieces. It's a little mixed up, and we've got a little bit of a sense of what's going on. We can start to see that things are happening. But when you put them together, when you start to see there's a final result, when you put something together, then you get to see the final result, which was God was going to save his people out of Israel. They were going to walk through water. God was going to separate the walls of water to save Israel, and they were going to remember that for the rest of their history. We still talk about it today. There was something beautiful coming out of the pain and the suffering, and God gave little glimpses here and there, but he knew the whole picture, and he knew exactly what was going to happen. I can tell you the last 3 years of my life, they have been confusing. I have had times where I don't know why God's put things in my life. I don't know why I had to get in an accident. As somebody who loved to play sports and loved to run around, it was tough. It's hard to know that my left leg is never, ever going to be the same. I don't know why I had to experience watching my then 3-year-old son, and then at 4, and then at 5, deal with cancer and lose his hair and get needles poked in him. I don't always know the answer. And if I said that it was always easy all the time because intellectually I know God's got a plan. That's just not reality. I don't think that all the time because emotions hit and real life hits and it's tough. But you know what? We get just little glimpses sometimes, and we may not think about it in this way, but it is God's grace. God in his grace says, here, let me just give you a small portion of the picture. Let me just show you that through this experience that your son now is going to have a stronger faith than most 3, 4, 5-year-olds ever know. I get to watch my son when my oldest is scared. He gets to go to him and he says, "Don't worry, Asher, because God is with you." He learned that from experience. I know that when he goes in and he gets his treatments all the time when he has to get poked with the needle. He's got a port. Initially, he didn't have a port. They had to go in all the time. And it was absolutely terrible. But you know what song he chose every time? It was a song from VBS that says, "You do not have to fear because God is with you." And he plays it every single time. Every nurse knows that he's going to play that song. And we get these little glimpses of how God is working something incredible. And it doesn't mean that it's not hard in the time sometimes, but I can tell you one thing, that at the end of the day, I know that God is doing something amazing and miraculous, and I may not see it. I may not see it on this side of earth. In fact, I probably won't see every single way that this has impacted it, but I know that it's beautiful. I know that it's incredible. And ultimately, I am just blessed that I get to be a part of it. Because even though Moses, he's not going to get to see the promised land. He's going to do all these things, and he's going to lead them out of Egypt, and he's going to bring them the commandments, and he's going to do all these incredible things. Moses does not get to see the promised land. But I can tell you what, it doesn't mean that Moses' sacrifice was useless. And it doesn't mean that Moses doesn't get to see the later result of what his work that God did in his life was. And he would rejoice. And so for us, what we get to know is, I don't know what you're going through right now. I don't know what pain you're experiencing. I don't know what struggles life has you in. But I can tell you one thing. If you will focus your mind on the little glimpses that God gives you, you'll make it through. Because God in His grace says, look, there's something I'm doing. If you'll just trust. And it's going to make something absolutely miraculous. But for now, people in Rico, keep fighting. Keep going. Because God has something incredibly amazing. And one day, we're going to look back on this, and when people write our story, if we see our story written out, we're going to look back, and at the end of our story, it's going to read, and God knew. He knew. He suffered with you. He walked with you. He lived with you. But He knew that what you were going through, and He was making something out of it. He does this all out Scripture, all throughout it. We see that God is doing something. We just have to trust. God knew. Will you pray with me this morning? God, we thank you that you are a God who knows all. God, we know that at times that it can be hard to trust what you're actually doing. And yet, God, you know how hard it is. You can sympathize with this, God. You know the pain that we feel. You know what it's like. But God, I'd ask that we would just have people to come alongside us who can encourage us, God, that we would be in your word, that we would be in prayer, that, God, we would lean on you because, God, we thank you that you are God who has a perfect plan in mind. God, we're so thankful that you choose just regular human beings to be a part of your artwork. That we will look back, God, and see how incredible what you did in us was. Until then, God, we pray for supernatural faith. God, we pray for strength. Help us keep our focus on you. In your Son's name, amen.